Okay, so have you ever felt like, I don't know, maybe a little overwhelmed with all the self-help stuff out there? You pick up a book, right? And it's like promising you inner peace and like a whole new you. But then you get, I don't know, 3 chapters in and you're like more stressed than when you started.
Yeah, I've been there. It's like, am I doing this self-help thing wrong?
Right? Totally. So that's why this time for this deep dive, we're going back to a classic feeling good, the new mood therapy. And I'm not kidding, this book is kind of legendary.
It really is. And the author, David D. Burns, he's like, I don't know, think of him as like the rock star of cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT.
Except instead of, screaming into a microphone, he's handing you the microphone and being like, you got this.
It's so true. And one of the biggest things Feeling Good lays out is this idea that, like, your thoughts, they're the ones driving the bus, not the stuff happening around you. It's like your thoughts are the bus driver, not the passengers.
Okay, that is a good analogy.
Thanks. It seems obvious now, but back when the book first came out, revolutionary.
Right, because it's so easy to fall into that trap of like, oh my gosh, my presentation totally bombed, I am a failure. But Burns, he like flips the script. He'd probably say, to think about it this way, imagine 2 coworkers, right? Same exact situation. They get tough feedback from their boss. One of them immediately goes to that place of, ugh, I'm incompetent, and just totally spirals, feels defeated. But the other one, they hear the same feedback, but they think, okay, this is a chance for me to improve, time to step up my game.
And it's the same situation, same feedback, but totally different vibes based purely on how they're choosing to think about it.
Exactly. And that is so powerful. And this isn't about like, slapping on a fake smile and pretending everything's perfect.
No, definitely not. It's
Yeah.
not about denying reality. It's about realizing you have a choice in how you react.
Yeah.
You have the power to steer your thoughts in a different direction, even if you can't control the situation itself.
Yes, you are not just along for the ride, you're the one with your hands on the wheel. And speaking of driving, remember how Burns talks about those cognitive distortions? He gives us this roadmap for navigating those mental detours.
Right. They're like those potholes you don't see coming until your car slams into them. And we're not just talking about like regular old negative thinking. It's deeper than that. We're talking about those sneaky thought traps, those mental patterns that can really trip us up.
Yes, like imagine this. You're in a job interview, you're nailing it, you feel fantastic, but then there's that one question and you totally blank.
Oh, I know that feeling. And then the interview is over, you're walking out, and all you can think about is that one stinking question.
Exactly. You totally forget about all the amazing answers you gave, all the things you did right, and you fixate on that one tiny thing. And that, my friend, that is classic all or nothing thinking.
It's like your brain decides to focus on the one tiny scratch on a beautiful painting and ignores the entire masterpiece.
Yes. It's so frustrating. But here's the good news. Burns doesn't just point out these potholes and leave us stranded. He gives us tools, actual strategies to get unstuck.
Like that triple column technique you talked about, right? That one's gold.
Okay, so imagine this. You've got 3 columns. Column 1, that's where you write down the nasty thought that's trying to steal your joy. So in this case, it might be something like, ugh, I totally choked in that interview.
Right.
But then column 2, this is where you challenge that thought. You ask yourself, wait a minute, did I really bomb the whole interview because of one question?
And usually when you really look at it objectively, the answer is no. You probably did way better than you're giving yourself credit for.
Exactly. And that's where column 3 comes in. Now that you've challenged that initial thought, it's time for a reframe. This is where you come up with a more balanced, realistic perspective. So instead of I'm a failure, it might be, okay, I could have handled that question better, but overall, I think I made a good impression.
It's about retraining your brain to focus on the bigger picture, not just those isolated moments. And it's amazing how much of a difference it makes.
Right. It's practical, it's empowering, and it actually works. And that's just one of the many techniques Burns lays out. And speaking of patterns, let's talk about how we view our own self-worth.
Because this is where a lot of us get tripped up, right? We start tying our self-esteem to external achievements, like our job titles or how much money we make.
Oh, I am so guilty of this.
Me too. But Burns would probably say that tying your self-esteem to achievements is like, it's like building a house on like a foundation of jelly.
Okay, I'm never forgetting that visual. So no more of this, I'll be happy when I get that promotion, or I'll finally feel worthy if I just lose those last 5 pounds.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that your worth isn't a prize you have to earn. It's not conditional. You are worthy of love and belonging just as you are right here, right now.
It's about accepting yourself, flaws and all, right? Because we all have them. It's what makes us human.
Exactly. And you know what? This doesn't mean we just stop trying to grow or improve. It's not about stagnation. It's just about recognizing that your inherent worth isn't up for debate. It's about having your own back, even when you mess up. And speaking of messing up, let's talk about one of the most mind-blowing concepts from feeling good, action before motivation.
Wait, are you telling me I don't have to wait for some magical burst of energy to finally clean my apartment?
I know, right? It sounds crazy, but it makes so much sense when you really think about it.
Yeah.
We always tell ourselves, oh, I'll do it when I feel like it. But especially if you're struggling with low mood or anxiety, that motivation might never show up.
Oh, it's true. I've spent countless nights on the couch, convinced that tomorrow will be the day I suddenly morph into a productivity machine.
I've been there too. But Burns argues that action often comes before the motivation. You don't wait to feel like doing the thing, you just start doing it, even if it's something small.
So instead of waiting to feel motivated to clean the entire apartment, I could just start by, like, loading the dishwasher.
Yes, exactly. Because that little win, as small as it seems, it can create a snowball effect. It gives you a sense of accomplishment, which can then fuel your motivation to tackle bigger tasks.
So even if I don't feel like a productivity guru, I can at least start by sharpening my metaphorical pencils, right? Just take that first step.
Precisely. It's about outsmarting your brain's natural tendency to procrastinate. And while we're on the topic of challenges, let's dive into one that trips up a lot of us. Criticism. There's this one line from Burns that always stuck with me. He said, "There has never been a single time in your life when the critical comments of some other person upset you, even to a small extent." Let that sink in for a minute.
Okay, I'm trying to wrap my head around this. Is he saying we should all just grow super thick skin and ignore feedback altogether?
No, not at all. It's not about becoming completely insensitive to feedback. It's more about recognizing that the real sting of criticism, the part that really gets us down, often comes from how we internalize it. It's about realizing that just because someone said something critical doesn't mean it's automatically true, and it definitely doesn't mean it defines our worth.
Oh, okay. So it's more about separating the critique from our sense of self. Like, someone can criticize our work, our choices, even our outfits, but that doesn't mean they're criticizing our inherent value as human beings.
Exactly. It's about learning to detach our self-worth from other people's opinions. Easier said than done, I know. But so incredibly freeing when you can actually start to do it.
Right. Because then it becomes less about, oh my gosh, they're right, I'm a failure, and more like, okay, that's interesting feedback. I'll take what resonates and leave the rest.
Exactly. It's about building that inner resilience so we're not constantly being tossed around by every little negative comment that comes our way. And you know what this makes me think about? The whole seeking validation thing.
Yeah.
Because if we're really secure in ourselves, if we truly believe in our own worth, do we really need that constant approval from other people? And this is something Burns digs into as well.
Oh, yeah, he does.
Because, let's be honest, a lot of us are, in his words, approval addicts. We're hooked on that external validation, even though it's a really shaky foundation for happiness. Think about it. If your mood is completely dependent on other people's opinions, you're giving them all the power.
Okay, yeah, approval addiction. That is definitely going on my list of things to watch out for. So if we're ditching the need for constant validation, what's the alternative? How does feeling good redefine success?
Well, what if, instead of chasing external validation, we focused on cultivating genuine self-acceptance? Imagine how much freer you'd feel if your self-worth wasn't tied to your job title, how much money you have, or how many likes you get on social media.
Oh, that would be amazing. To not feel like I constantly have to prove myself.
Right. And Burns reminds us that success isn't just about those external achievements. True success, the kind that actually makes you feel good, is multifaceted.
It's about having those deep, meaningful connections with others. It's about pursuing your passions, even if they don't make you a ton of money. It's about personal growth, about learning and evolving and becoming the best version of yourself.
Yes. And you know what else? It's about making time for joy, for the things that make you feel alive. Because life isn't just about checking things off your to-do list. It's about experiencing all the richness that life has to offer.
It's about living intentionally, right? Making choices from a place of alignment, not from a place of fear or scarcity.
Exactly. It's about saying yes to the things that light you up and no to the things that drain you, even if those choices go against societal expectations.
So less hustle harder and more live intentionally. I like the sound of that a lot.
You know, as I was revisiting Feeling Good, one thing that really struck me was that Burns, he doesn't shy away from the heavier stuff. You know, the emotions most of us would rather avoid, like the plague.
Oh, you mean like the guilt, the shame, all that?
Exactly, those ones. He dives right into them. And what's interesting is he doesn't just say, oh, just get rid of guilt, it's bad. He actually differentiates between healthy guilt and unhealthy guilt.
Okay, hold on. Healthy guilt. There's a difference.
Right. It sounds kind of strange at first, but it makes sense. So, healthy guilt, that's like the kind that motivates us to make amends when we've messed up,
Yeah.
pushes us to do better next time. Unhealthy guilt, though, that's the kind that just keeps us stuck in a shame spiral. It's like we did something wrong, and now we're beating ourselves up over and over, and it's not helpful.
Okay, so like accidentally spilling coffee on someone's white rug, healthy guilt says, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Let me get that clean for you. Unhealthy guilt says, I am a horrible, clumsy person. I should just never leave the house again.
Exactly. It's like a broken record in your mind that just keeps repeating the same negative messages.
Right.
And Burns gives us really practical strategies for dealing with those unhealthy guilt trips. He talks about the importance of, first of all, acknowledging where we messed up and taking responsibility for our actions, but then crucially, learning from the experience, and this is key, offering ourselves some compassion.
That self-compassion piece is so important, but I feel like it's easier said than done, especially when it comes to shame.
It's true. Shame is a whole other beast. Guilt is more about what we did, but shame is deeper. It's like this feeling that we are fundamentally flawed. Like at our core, we're just not good enough.
And that is a really tough one to shake.
It is. And that's where I think Burns' emphasis on self-acceptance is so crucial. Because it's like, yeah, we all have flaws, we all make mistakes, but those imperfections don't define us. They don't negate our inherent worth as human beings.
It's like we can acknowledge the mistake, we can even feel appropriately guilty about it, but we don't have to let it become our entire identity. We're not defined by our worst moments.
Exactly. And he has these exercises he calls shame attacking exercise.
To shame attacking. Okay, that sounds, I don't know, a little intense.
I know. The name sounds kind of scary, like you're going into battle with your inner demons. But it's really not about that. It's more about gently, and I emphasize gently, confronting those fears and those deeply held beliefs that are fueling the shame cycle.
So more like a guided exploration rather than a full-on assault.
Exactly. It's about approaching those uncomfortable emotions with curiosity and with a lot of kindness, not trying to beat them into submission. Because, let's be honest, trying to ignore those emotions or push them down never really works, does it? They just tend to come back even stronger.
Oh, they always come back. And usually at the worst possible time.
Right. Like you're about to give a big presentation and suddenly, boom, there's that wave of shame from that one time you totally froze up in front of the class in high school.
Exactly. It's like our brains are wired to hold on to those embarrassing moments.
They really are. And speaking of emotions that can feel super overwhelming, let's talk about anxiety. Burns has this great analogy where he compares anxiety to a false alarm system in the brain.
Oh, I like that. Because it's true, right? Like our brains are hardwired to protect us from danger, to keep us safe. But sometimes those alarm bells go off even when there's no real threat.
Exactly. Like you're about to go on a date and your brain is suddenly convinced that this is going to be the most disastrous date in the history of dating, even though logically you know that's probably not true.
Oh my gosh, yes. Or like, for me, even just making a phone call sometimes feels like a DEFCON 1 situation.
Totally. But just like with those cognitive distortions we talked about earlier, Burns gives us this framework for challenging those anxious thoughts. Because here's the thing, anxiety thrives on uncertainty. It loves to spin those what-if scenarios and blow them way out of proportion.
Oh, it's true. My brain is like a master storyteller when it comes to worst-case scenarios.
Mine too. But here's the key. We don't have to believe those stories. Just because our brain thinks something doesn't make it true. So instead of getting swept away by those anxious thoughts, Burns encourages us to hit the pause button, take a step back, and really examine the evidence. Are those worries based on facts? Or are they just our imaginations running wild?
It's about choosing to focus on the evidence, not the anxieties, which is really tough to do when you're in the middle of a full-on anxiety spiral. Are there any practical tips for dealing with those moments when you feel like you're about to lose it?
Absolutely. And Burns talks a lot about the importance of relaxation techniques, particularly deep breathing. And it's not just about just take a deep breath and everything will be fine. It's actually about literally shifting your body out of that fight or flight mode that anxiety triggers.
It's like hitting the reset button on your nervous system, right? Like, okay, it's cool. We're not actually being chased by a tiger right now. We can chill. I can definitely get behind that.
Exactly. It's about regaining that sense of control. And I think that's one of the most empowering things about feeling good. It's not just about managing the tough stuff. It's also about giving us practical steps to actually cultivate more joy and happiness in our lives.
Okay, so it's less about just surviving and more about actually thriving. Sign me up.
Right. Because Burns, he argues that happiness isn't just the absence of negative emotions. It's something we can actively cultivate through our thoughts, our actions, and our relationships. And he even provides specific, actionable happiness hacks that we can use.
Happiness hacks. Okay, now those are the kind of life hacks I can get behind. So what are we talking about here? Give me the good stuff.
Okay, so one of the simplest yet most powerful is gratitude. Like really taking the time to savor those small, everyday moments of joy.
Like that first sip of coffee in the morning or finding a $20 bill in your pocket.
Exactly. Because those little boosts of positivity, they really do add up over time. He also talks about the importance of nurturing our relationships with others, engaging in activities we find fulfilling, things that make us feel alive.
So less doom scrolling and more connecting with loved ones, less binge watching TV and more pursuing those passions that we've maybe been putting off.
Exactly. It's about taking an active role in shaping our experience rather than just passively letting life happen to us.
It's about creating a life that we're excited to wake up for. And you know what? That reminds me, Burns talks a lot about personal responsibility, right? But isn't there a danger of that tipping over into self-blame? Like, if I'm not happy, if I'm not thriving, does that mean it's all my fault?
That's such a good point, and I think it's something a lot of people worry about when it comes to self-help in general. But to be fair to Burns, he addresses that directly in the book. He's not saying we should blame ourselves for our emotions or pretend that external factors don't matter, because they absolutely do. Like, life throws curveballs. That's just part of the human experience.
Right, like losing a job, dealing with a global pandemic, experiencing a natural disaster. Those aren't things we can just positive thinking our way out of.
Exactly. And Burns acknowledges that. But what he emphasizes is that even in the midst of those really difficult circumstances, we still have a choice. We can choose to wallow in negativity, or we can choose to focus on what we can control, on what we can do to move forward.
So it's not about denying the reality of the situation. It's about acknowledging the situation, but then choosing how we respond to it.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that while we may not be able to control everything that happens to us, we can control how we respond, we can control what we choose to focus on, and ultimately we can control how we choose to live our lives.
It's about not letting those external circumstances define us. It's about empowerment, even in the face of adversity. So we've been spending this deep dive really digging into feeling good, right? We've talked about how much power our thoughts have over our emotions, all those sneaky cognitive distortions Burns lays out, and even those practical happiness hacks. But I think it's important to remember that, no self-help book is perfect. There's always more to the story.
Oh, absolutely. Feeling good, for all its brilliance, it's definitely faced its fair share of criticism over the years, and I think it's important to acknowledge that.
Right, because we don't want to just blindly accept everything without, a little critical thinking of our own.
Exactly. So one of the criticisms I've heard, and I think it's a valid one, is that the book can feel very individual focused. Like it's all about just change your thinking and everything will be better, but it doesn't always address the very real impact of those larger systemic issues that people are facing.
Right. You can't just positive affirmation your way out of poverty.
Exactly. And while Bruns does talk about the importance of social connection and contributing to something larger than yourself, some critics argue that he misses how these external factors, these systemic issues like poverty, racism, discrimination, how those things really impact our mental health as well.
It's one thing to say, oh, just think happy thoughts and you'll feel better. But when you're dealing with those kinds of challenges, it's just not that simple.
It's not that simple at all. And then there's another criticism I've heard, which is that the book can sometimes feel a bit, I don't know, formulaic at times.
Right, like follow these 10 steps and boom, instant happiness guaranteed.
Right, like mental health is just a simple equation to solve. And while Burns is very structured in his approach, which I get it, some people find that helpful, especially if you're looking for clear steps to follow. But the thing is, mental health is not one size fits all.
Definitely not. We're all coming from different places, dealing with different challenges. What works for one person might not work for another, and healing is definitely not always linear.
So true. And feeling good, while a great resource, It's not a replacement for professional help.
Right. If you're really struggling, reach out to a therapist. There is no shame in asking for help.
Absolutely not. It's actually one of the bravest things you can do. And, despite these criticisms, there's a reason Feeling Good has been so incredibly impactful and why it's still a bestseller all these years later. What do you think its greatest strength is?
That's a good question. I think for me, it's that Burns really democratized cognitive behavioral therapy. He took these concepts that before were kind of locked away in academic journals and therapy rooms, and he made them accessible to everyone.
Exactly. He gave people the language, the tools to understand their own minds in a way that they never had before.
Right, and that's huge. He didn't just write a book, he sparked a whole mental health movement.
He really did. And that movement has had such a positive ripple effect. Now CBT is one of the most widely used, most effective therapies out there.
And it's not just therapy. Those principles are everywhere. You see them in other self-help books and apps all over the place, and I think that's incredible. But as we wrap up our deep dive on Feeling Good, I think it's important to remember that this is just the beginning. This book, it's a great starting point. It's like that first step on a longer journey.
It's a roadmap, but it's up to each of us to actually take the journey.
Right. So read the book, highlight the parts that speak to you, go back to it, reread it. Don't be afraid to take what resonates and leave what doesn't. And most importantly, be kind to yourself along the way.
Yes, because change takes time. It takes effort. And sometimes it's messy.
And you don't have to do it alone. Talk to a friend, a family member, a therapist, join a support group. Find your people. We're all in this together, right?
We are. And remember, you are capable of more than you know. So go out there, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep feeling good.
Yes, I love that. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Until next time, thanks for listening.